Okay, this lesson is going to be about biomolecules, which are the molecules that we have to have in order to make up living cells, which make up us and other living organisms. You will need to take these notes down in your journal, so make sure you have your journal ready to go. The title of the notes will be the Biomolecules of Life notes, and when you are ready, you can proceed to the next slide. Okay, biomolecules are the molecules that are essential for all living things, that make up all living things and are necessary to make up living cells. I want you to write this definition down in your journal. Press pause if you need some extra time. And before we move on, we're going to need to talk about organic versus inorganic compounds. Think for a second, what comes to mind when you think of the word organic? Probably what comes to mind is shopping at the grocery store and you see some item that says organic lettuce or organic bananas, right? And marketing tells us that organic is supposed to be more healthier for you, it's natural, it's the best way to buy your food. But in science class, organic means something different. In fact, in science class, organic means anything that contains carbon. So anything that contains carbon is considered to be organic. That means that inorganic is anything that does not contain carbon. So let's think of a few examples of these two. Something that would be organic would be sugar. That contains carbon. Would water be organic or inorganic? It would be inorganic because it does not contain carbon. Carbon makes up all living things and is part of all four biomolecules because of four unique characteristics that exist in carbon. Carbon is, first of all, very abundant. So carbon is very abundant. We can find it in many different places on Earth, including inside of you and me. We breathe it in, we breathe it out as carbon dioxide, for instance. In addition, carbon is able to be a part of biomolecules because it is very stable. Carbon is a very stable molecule and is not reactive, so it's not going to explode in certain conditions. It's very stable. Carbon can also have up to 4 bonds, which is going to be important when constructing those biomolecules that are going to be necessary to make cells. And lastly, carbon can have those single, double, or triple bonds, again, which we're going to see in those biomolecules when we take and make those polymers. Right? So take a look at the pictures I have here. We have an item of coal or graphite, that is carbon. We also have here the chemical structure of carbon. And here you can see the diamond, a diamond ring, because diamonds are simply compressed carbon. If you need to take some time to write down what's on the screen, you can pause the video before proceeding. Okay, some vocab that we need to cover before we can move on into our 4 biomolecules are monomer and polymer. So a monomer is the building block, a single building block of a molecule. And so my example that I'm going to give you of a monomer is going to be this bead here. A single bead is like one monomer, okay? It's this building block, the smallest unit of a molecule, okay? A polymer is a chain of monomers that we put together. So when we put those beads together, we get what we call a polymer. So one monomer put together, a whole bunch of those, turns into a polymer. And those polymers are going to be our biomolecules that make up living cells. All right, let's move into now talking about our 4 categories of biomolecules. We're going to start out with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, you probably think of those as being bad, right? Don't eat too many carbs. You know, if you want to lose weight, you're supposed to cut out your carbs. But we are actually going to find out that carbohydrates play an important role in our structures of our cells and keep making us healthy. So let's start out by writing down that carbs are used as our first source of energy. So you may have heard about carb loading the night before a big race. Sometimes athletes can eat like a huge bowl of spaghetti and really, really, really eat those carbs because they know that that those carbs are going to be used as their first source of energy and give them the energy they need to get through that race. All right, next let's write down the 3 elements that are in carbohydrates. That is CHO, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, or CHO. Right, so those are our 3 elements in carbohydrates. The monomer of a carbohydrate is a monosaccharide, right? That prefix mono means 1, and saccharide means sugar. Therefore, a monosaccharide is a single sugar. Now, like we talked about on the previous slide, remember when we put a whole bunch of monomers together, that creates a polymer. And a polymer of a carbohydrate is called a polysaccharide. So basically it's the same thing, except for now instead of saying mono, it's now a poly. So it's now many sugars put together. And we have different types of polysaccharides that are going to have different functions. Some of these are structural. So cellulose is a structural polysaccharide that makes up the cell wall in plants. And without cellulose, our plants wouldn't have that rigid structure they need to be able to stand up straight. Chitin, which is not, it's pronounced, the CHITIN word is pronounced chitin, makes up the cell wall of fungus. Right, and we can also find these in the exoskeleton of some insects, all right, to help give them the rigid structure they need to be protected. Okay, another function of these polysaccharides are storage, right? Glycogen storage is super important, and this is what we do in our bodies. This is short-term energy storage in animals, okay? And we are able to store up energy between meals because of glycogen. So if you ate breakfast this morning, your cells took in that energy, and whatever energy they didn't need, they stored it in the form of glycogen, so that before it became lunchtime, your cells could go back, take that glycogen, and break it back down to glucose, and get that energy they needed in order to make it to the next meal. All right? Now in plants have the same kind of storage idea, except for they form a starch instead of glycogen. And so you may have heard of potatoes. Potatoes are actually the starch used by the potato plant to have short-term energy storage. All right, lipids are our fats, oils, and waxes. If you have ever heard of a little thing called liposuction, you know that liposuction actually is a procedure that can be done to suck the fat out of someone. So notice that lipid and lipo both start with that LIP. Okay, so I want you to use that to remember that lipids are our fats, right? Now, not all fats are bad, right? We do need fat because they do have different functions for us. For instance, in seals and whales, lipids form blubber, okay? And blubber is used to insulate and help protect their temperature. We also need fat to help insulate our organs and protect them from being easily damaged. All right, so lipids, in addition to that, help us to have long-term energy storage, which means storing that energy for longer periods of time so that if we do ever get into a situation where we run out of food, we can tap into that storage and have plenty of energy to be able to survive. Now, notice that lipids, just like carbohydrates, are also contain the elements C, H, and O, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, or CHO. All right, but don't be confused because the structure of the lipid is going to be very different from the structure of the carbohydrate, right? Whereas the carbohydrate was a ring shape, the lipid is going to be a chain. Right? Remember that when we talked yesterday about properties of water, we talked about how hydrophobic and nonpolar things do not like water. And so lipids hate water. So they are hydrophobic, which makes them nonpolar. Right? The monomer of a lipid is going to be a glycerol and a fatty acid tail. And we're also going to have these things called phospholipids, which we're going to learn more about when we get to talking about cell membrane structure in a couple of weeks, that look kind of like this, and they are also lipids. Now let's take a look over here at these two structures I have on the screen. All right, the top structure says saturated, and the bottom structure says unsaturated. What do you notice is different between the two structures? Right, you probably said, well, the unsaturated has an equal sign. Well, that equal sign is actually called a double bond, all right? And that double bond causes a bend in the unsaturated fat. So the unsaturated, if it's bent, it's not going to be able to form a solid. It's going to stay a liquid, all right? The saturated are straight, which means they can easily stack on top of each other like papers and form a solid. So would you rather have a bent liquid fat floating through your arteries and veins, or the solid saturated one? Right, we want to have the unsaturated fats. These are going to be our good fats that we need, whereas the saturated is going to be the bad fat. That's the kind that clogs up your arteries and is not good for you. All right, let's talk a little bit about protein. Protein is very important because these are the actual structural molecules that make up who we are by making up our skin, muscles, and organs. All right, they contain carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and now we add an extra element, nitrogen. All right, so we have CHO, and now we have CHON. All right, the monomer of a protein is an amino acid, and this is an amino acid structure over here. Notice there's a nitrogen here. This is our amino group, and then we have our carboxyl group over here, and we have this thing here, an R, which is our side chain, and this is going to change based on which amino acid we are actually talking about, okay? Now, we have a total of 20 amino acids. 20 different amino acids, and they all are different based on the differences in the R chain. Okay? Some examples of protein that you should make sure and write down are the meats, eggs, and lovely enzymes, which we're going to get lots of fun to talk about. Enzymes help us to break down things and make reactions in our body happen a lot faster. And without enzymes, our bodies would not be able to function the way they do. All right, the last biomolecule is nucleic acid. And nucleic acid is very important because your nucleic acid is what holds all of our genetic material, right? So that's going to be our DNA and our RNA. And they contain carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and now we add a P for phosphorus, which is located in our phosphate group. Right? The monomer of our nucleic acid is called a nucleotide. And every nucleotide has 3 different parts. All right, so the first part is going to be our phosphate group. And our phosphate group kind of looks like a little chimney on the little house here. Right? The second part of our nucleotide is going to look like the house, and that's our deoxyribose sugar, or it could be our ribose sugar if we're talking about RNA. Right? And so that looks like our house. And then our nitrogenous base, which can be either, we have adenine, guanine, thymine, cytosine, and uracil if you are in uracil if it's in RNA. Those come off the side, kind of like a sidewalk. All right, so these are the 3 parts of our nucleic acid, and you should be able to recognize a nucleotide and know that it is a monomer of a nucleic acid. All right, one last thing before we conclude our biomolecule lesson. I want to point out that if you put your molecules in order of carb, lipid, protein, and nucleic acid, it's always going to be CHO, CHON, and CHOMP. All right, so carbs have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Same thing with lipids. With proteins, we add a CHON in, and in nucleic acids, we have CHOMP, an N instead of a P, an M instead of an M. So CHO, CHON, and CHOMP. That should be an easy way to help you remember what elements are in each of the biomolecules. Make sure you have all your notes recorded down, and if you have any questions, please let me know.